We had to throw out all the existing infrastructure, kind of rethink the entire developer experience and rethink a lot of, managing containers and managing large models and working with GPUs. So the core idea is like, we don't build the applications, we build like the infrastructure below, and we're building kind of a new infrastructure stack that's more well-suited for AI.
Welcome to The Peel. I'm your host, Turner Novak, founder of Banana Capital. Today's guest is Erik Bernhardsson, co-founder and CEO of Modal. We talk about building what is essentially a new cloud provider created from the ground up, optimized for AI.
90% of the work was just building infrastructure, not application.
What actually happened with the great GPU shortage?
We talked to a lot of these startups. They're like sitting on 1,000 GPUs. We can't leverage all of them. Like, we don't know what to do with them.
Lessons joining Spotify as the 40th employee.
If you just have smart people who are pretty autonomous and have a mission, you need a lot less structure than you think. People should just come in every morning and just ask themselves, what can I do for the business today?
Why you should treat hiring like a prediction problem.
Like being a little impatient. I like people who want to just like get stuff done.
What to prioritize during hypergrowth.
I mean, when you have 5 engineers and like you find product market fit, you don't have a choice. Just like chase that shit.
What most people get wrong working with early customers.
You should take their pain points extremely seriously. But when they suggest solutions, you should almost like ignore them.
How Modal fixes the inference problem in AI.
Unlike training, where you're actually fine with having like a static amount of GPUs. When you're doing inference, you have like very volatile demand.
Why you should start a company in your 30s and 40s.
It's also hard to find a problem that's hard, but not impossible. And like knowing that.
How AI is changing software and developer productivity.
I think there's so much software that has to get built. I think we're going to need a lot more engineers over the next decade.
And thoughts on raising capital in hot markets.
The one clear misalignment I see in like VC versus founders is like, VCs will always advise you to take more money than you need.
A quick thank you to Tim Chen at Essence for introducing me to Erik, and to Erik's co-founder Akshat for helping me brainstorm topics for this. A reminder that I publish new episodes of The Peel every week. Check out the back catalog of over 100 episodes exploring the world's greatest startup stories, just like this one. And tune in next week for a conversation with Adit Abraham, co-founder and CEO of Reducto, which just announced their $75 million Series B, led by A16Z, to define how the world processes unstructured data. Now, let's talk to Erik after a quick word from Meow and Hanover Park. If you're currently paying for bookkeeping, my friends at Meow just launched something that can save your startup serious money. If you don't care about billboards or yacht parties, Meow provides free bookkeeping for eligible startups that comes with a 24/7, 365 Slack channel with a real CPA that answers fast. The result? More months of runway without the dilution. You cutting out your bookkeeping expense. Meow also offers the lowest cost banking services for startups, helping you reinvest every penny into growing your company. Apply at meow.com and tell them Turner sent you to see if you're eligible for free quality bookkeeping. This episode is also brought to you by Hanover Park. Hanover Park vertically integrates fund admin, portfolio management, and the LP experience for finance and investment teams. Most of you have probably interfaced with a fund admin provider in some way. They're a necessary evil for every type of asset manager across not just venture, but also private equity and private credit. They provide bookkeeping and accounting so investment firms can report to their investors on a quarterly basis. What's crazy is they charge hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars per year to basically not screw up your accounting. They stitch together third-party software like QuickBooks, Bill.com, Salesforce, and Excel, and then throw a bunch of bodies at you. And that's where Hanover Park comes in. They built their own accounting system from scratch, which ingests all your firm's data and documents, and their AI-native solution automates all the manual work that drives private market investors crazy. Head to hanoverpark.com/Turner and try the AI-native ERP for private market funds. That's hanoverpark.com/Turner and 10x your fund admin. Erik, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, this will be fun. We were talking about trying to learn English and different random words in different languages. I hope we're going to learn a lot about just generally everything that you're doing right now in your life throughout the conversation. But super quick, can you give us just like a super high level for someone who is not familiar with Modal on what it is?
Yeah, totally. The way I usually describe it is AI infrastructure, although that's a little bit of a simplification, but
That's good though.
yeah, that's sort of, if I condense it to like 2 words.
Super simple and then get a little bit more complicated.
Exactly, yeah. So if you think about a lot of traditional infrastructure, like, Kubernetes and Docker and things like that, like a lot of it works really well for back-end applications or like traditional like kind of CRUD apps, like if you're building a, whatever, retail online store or something like that. And that's what a lot of traditional infrastructure has been built for. But in this new world of AI, like when you start to deploy models and start to deal with GPUs and scaling up and down and running all over the world and developers iterating, a lot of the infrastructure doesn't really work super well. So that was the sort of impetus for the genesis for me starting to think about like, could we actually build a better infrastructure provider back in 2020 or 2021 when I started Modal, and kind of realized in order to do that, we have to throw out all the existing infrastructure, start over with a new platform, kind of rethink the entire developer experience, and rethink a lot of managing containers and managing large models and working with GPUs. I spent a couple of years like kind of rethinking that and building a lot of foundational infrastructure. Today, we have a platform. We sort of basically you can think of it as almost like a cloud provider in itself. We manage many thousands of GPUs. We run a lot of different types of applications, generative media, large language models, vibe coding platforms, and training and inference and all kinds of other stuff. So the core idea is like, we don't build the applications, we build like the infrastructure below, and we're building kind of a new infrastructure stack that's more well suited for AI and other stuff sometimes.
Maybe this is either like a really dumb or a really insightful question, but is there something that was going on that made it so that you couldn't really use the traditional infrastructure for doing AI stuff? Like, are they like designed differently? Are they like too slow for like processing things? Like, what is it that makes them so much different? Are they like more focused on storage or something?
I think that's a good question. And I don't know if I have like an amazing answer, but I think that a lot of the existing stuff works okay for traditional applications. But my experience, and by the way, like this is kind of going into my background a little bit, but I spent a lot of time at Spotify for 7 years. And most of the time I spent at Spotify, I built a music recommendation system. So a lot of this, like sort of the perception of infrastructure as broken was actually shaped by me building a lot of the music recommendation system at Spotify and realizing like 90% of the work was just building infrastructure, not applications. So what are the things that are broken? Like there's a couple of things. Like first of all, a lot of traditional infra is like not built for like fast feedback loops. And it turns out when you're building these AI applications, it's kind of annoying to test locally and to then like deploy it into production. So you can either like kind of split it in two different environments and like have, like you have like a local environment you test in and like a cloud environment you deploy into. But then instead you kind of replace it with a different problem where like you have this problem of like going from one environment to the other. This is not as much of a problem in traditional application development because a lot of infrastructure is like pretty good at like mocking the cloud development when you're developing locally. But in AI, it gets really hard because you have like GPUs and you have, very large models too. So like the initialization step is very complex. Like you need to load all these models into GPUs. So I think a lot of it comes back to like originally how I thought about it was like really developer experience and fast feedback loops. Like I wanted something where I could just write code and then hit enter and just like run it in the cloud immediately. And then it turns out that's actually really good also for just like running applications in the cloud because it enables you to scale up and down very fast. And then it turns out, with these new applications, another thing you have in AI land that you don't have in like backend land is GPU capacity problems. So now you have to start to think about, okay, you need to run multi-region and you need to aggregate capacity from all these different places in order to guarantee capacity. Because it turns out no cloud provider, no region and no cloud provider has like enough capacity to handle like this, dynamic, flexible scaling. Most of our workloads are inference. So there's like a number of things that sort of break with a lot of traditional backend infrastructure, which is why we decided to start over and build our own.
And then what's the big issue with GPUs? Like you kind of mentioned, like that was really a pretty big deal. Like for somebody who's never, I mean, maybe you could say like, what's a GPU versus CPU? Maybe that's like an interesting way to start. But then like, why is it so hard to get them? And what's the big problem going on there right now?
Yeah, I mean, GPUs, and hopefully, most people have heard the term. They do a lot of computation in parallel, and it turns out it's very good for AI applications because you need to do a lot of calculations or flops. Sometimes people talk about floating point operations. I honestly think a lot of it just comes back down to the fact that they're expensive. So like the fact that they're expensive means like a couple of things. Like one of it is like you want to like really push the utilization of those. Actually, like backend application, it like doesn't matter if you have like a lot of CPUs just sitting idle most of the time. It's like not like a crazy amount of cost. Actually, most of the cost is electricity anyway. So if you scale up and down, like if the GPUs are just sitting idle, it's actually kind of fine. But GPUs, like most of the cost is the GPU itself. And so one of the problems is just, you want to keep them you want to keep them utilized. And the other problem is like, because they're so expensive, you can't like assume that there's an infinite amount of them in the cloud, kind of like CPUs. Like CPUs actually, like, you can sort of assume a little bit more, at least, like there's like an infinite number of CPUs in the cloud. But GPUs, pretty quickly you run into capacity problems. So I think that's like a big difference.
So just because they're just so expensive and there just hasn't been enough that have been created yet that are just out there for people to use?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, they're like 10x or 100x more expensive than CPUs at this point.
So I've actually never really looked into this. This is maybe like this actually might be a dumb question. Why are there not more of them? Like why have we made more? Are we like capacity constrained because of NVIDIA is just not making them? Or
Yeah, exactly. TSMC or whatever, like we just can't make enough GPUs, right? Anyway, I think eventually it's going to catch up. And it's going to be interesting to see what that means for GPU prices and for resource management and all these things. Like maybe it goes the same way as CPUs. Maybe we won't care about utilization. Maybe they become super cheap. I don't know. What happens to AI at that point? I don't know. It's going to be really interesting to see. I think we're going to get there eventually. It might take 3 years. It might take 20 years. I don't know.
yeah. So this was sort of like identified as a big problem sort of in end of 22, beginning of 2023, this like lack of GPU supply. What kind of happened just over the next couple of years, just like in the industry from your perspective as things kind of started to evolve?
I mean, like, we've definitely caught up a little bit in terms of capacity. And I don't really think people talk enough about this, but GPU prices are actually down a lot. And like, if you look at like a few years ago, like there was this sort of almost like lore, or like, I don't know, like sometimes fueled by like VCs unnecessarily.
VCs are the worst at fueling, narratives.
It's just like almost like narrative, and like that, like, oh, you're starting an AI startup. Well, you need to go buy 1,000 GPUs, like otherwise you're not a real. So by the way, like you need to raise $100 million in order to do that. And like I almost felt like it became like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like it kind of reminded me of like the great toilet paper shortage during the pandemic. Like people just talking about shortage, then it becomes like, or like, I don't know, Silicon Valley Bank, right? They have this like self-fulfilling problem where like, so everyone went out and bought all these GPUs. And by the way, now it's been like a year or two. Like we talked to a lot of these startups. They're like, yeah, we're sitting on 1,000 GPUs. Like we can't leverage them, all of them. Like we don't know what to do with them. So I think this like model we had a couple of years ago where like people just bought like a lot of like long-term reservations. In many cases, they got like 3-year reservations. It's just not like, it's not good. It's not like, like, and by the way, that's something Modal solves, is everything with Modal is like usage based. You only pay for what you're actually using. It's consumption based, right? So you don't make upfront reservations or anything like that.
So one of the issues you might run into as a smaller company, less cash to work with, smaller balance sheet, you're going out and you're buying these GPUs, but then you're really not using them a pretty high percentage of the time, versus if you're using an option like Modal, you might pay a little bit more on like a per usage basis, but you're only using it a small amount of the time. Like you're only paying for what you actually use. So in theory, you actually save a lot of money.
As that's, yeah.
That's the pitch. That's the customer pitch, the investor pitch.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, there's also like kind of the flip side is like, if your app goes viral on Hacker News and you get like 1 million customers, overnight, like we'll handle that. We'll scale for you. So like you can sleep well knowing that like we can scale up, if you need 1,000 GPUs, we got you 1,000 GPUs. Like,
so how did you get GPUs? Did you like strategically like play this out? What's the story there where you have all this capacity for people?
There's this guy in the alley I know, and you have to go make this weird handshake. And
he's got trench coat. He like opens it up.
Yeah, exactly. He has a truck, and but like he blindfolds you and then drives this. I don't know where it is, somewhere in Jersey, I think. No, we just spent a lot of time like integrating with a lot of. I mean, we mostly use the hyperscalers, so we integrate with a lot of different hyperscalers, and it turns out they all have like a bunch of spot capacity in different regions at different times. And so by aggregating, I think we're using like 80 different regions at this point. Like we can always find capacity. I mean, we're integrated with more and more cloud providers and more regions all the time. So by kind of putting all that together, we can get capacity pretty much as you want, anytime you want.
Interesting. So do they have this whole sort of, instead of like a CPU rental business, they almost have this like GPU rental business that they're also running?
Totally. Yeah, exactly. Like, and Amazon has had GPUs for a long time. I remember running deep learning applications on Amazon, AWS, of course. Like, I don't know, I think 9 years ago. So they've been around for a long time, like doing GPUs too.
So then you mentioned a lot of people are using Modal. Like what's kind of like the most down the fairway, most common use cases you see people using it for?
A lot of it is generated media. So we found product market fit in particular with like applications like Stable Diffusion. That was like the first like mainstream application that we found that like people started coming to us and running a lot of stuff. And then it was like fine tuning, like it was called Dream Booth was like one thing kind of a few years ago.
Oh, I do not remember that one. It was like images, AI images.
You can upload a picture of yourself, and then like you could like fine tune a model based on that, and then like generate like realistic like AI photos. So like the first PMF application, the killer app was like Stable Diffusion. I think the second one was like these like AI photos. That was like our second main applications. But then it kind of continued from that. Like we have customers over the next year or two. Like this is like mostly 2023, 2024. We saw a lot of influx like customers using us for video and music. So Suno, for instance, is a big customer to use us for AI generated music. You can put in like generate a hip hop song about whatever, Kubernetes or cloud compute.
My daughters love Suno.
Actually, funny, my daughters too. I have two daughters. They also love it. Very scatological lyrics, but they're into
Yeah.
that.
The lyrics are like make a song about like daddy coming home from a trip to New York. And that's literally the song. The lyrics are just like dad went to New York. He came home. But they love it.
Yeah, my kids make way more immature songs, by the way.
Yeah, mine are so pure. We're holding on as long as we can. Like, please, just like stay as innocent as possible.
Yeah,
for
there's
as
a lot
long
of
as you can.
flatulence in my kids' songs.
Okay.
No, but so like AI, like stuff like that. But more recently, we started seeing a lot of. I think it kind of reflects a little bit like the adoption pattern of like AI. Like initially, it was like a lot of these like pure kind of Gen AI like native companies. But more recently, you're starting to see more like kind of mid stage, like later stage companies also adopting us, and it tends to be more for like more like normal use cases. A lot of like customer support or like LM, like fine tuning stuff like that. And then another couple of things we've seen more recently. Seen a lot of vibe coding platforms adopting Modal. We released it's kind of a separate product in a way because it's CPU based, but we have a product for safe execution of third party code, which means in most cases LM generated code. And so how these vibe coding platforms work is like they ask an LLM to generate code, and then they need to execute that code somewhere to build that app. And so we have Lovable, for instance, as a customer. They use for our sandboxing capability. Another use case has come up a lot in the last year or so is actually computational biotech. So we're starting to see a lot of customers using us for protein folding, sequence alignment, like those kind of quantum chemistry. It's actually super cool. I find like I was talking to a customer the other day, and they're like using us to like cure cancer. I'm like, nice. Like you're not just like face swapping, whatever. Like
making fart songs.
This is actually like something. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Actually kind of fun is like the Sam Altman comment. They didn't make a comment just the other day, something similar. But like we need these GPUs to both cure cancer and to like, face swapping or whatever.
AI slop. Yeah.
AI slop.
Wait, so you mentioned quantum chemistry. What is quantum chemistry? I've actually never even heard that.
I didn't even know. I should know because I studied physics, but I don't know. Wave functions, I guess.
Okay, I'm Googling it.
You have like probability distributions instead. There's like Newtonian physics. This is like my stupid trivialization. Yeah, it's like Newtonian physics, like sticks and balls, right? You have molecules, and you have like these balls with sticks in them, and you kind of just like simulate it. And then there's like quantum stuff, and in that case, everything is like probability distributions instead.
That's what it looks like. This is just it uses the principles of quantum mechanics to study atoms and molecules.
I think that's right. I should know.
Yeah, way over my head. I would fail that test. Actually, I think I got in chemistry in high school. I got like a C+ or something, and I was just like, I'm done.
I hated chemistry.
I probably should have. I don't know, just tried harder. Maybe I was just not. I don't know. I was not a good student back in high school or college. So are there any like surprising use cases? Maybe that is one. Is there anything else like maybe like the most shocking way someone is using AI infrastructure to build like most shocking or most interesting product?
Last week I was talking to a customer using this for weather forecasting. I'm like, it's kind of cool. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. Like, I find it like really interesting. Like it turns out like the state of the art weather models, like you can run them on a single GPU. Kind of cool.
Oh, because I feel like something like that could come into play. Like we were at a wedding a couple weeks ago, and the weather was really bad. And if you could pick, you probably would not want it on that day. So That could be an interesting use case for just like long-term weather forecasting. Like if you can plan out a year in advance and being like, this day will be sunny, this is a good wedding day.
I think that's like just physics. Like you can't really predict that far out. I think now we're like, we can like reliably predict like say 7 days out. I think with like better models, we might be able to push that to like 10, 12, you know?
Yeah.
And that's going to be like, take so much more compute, but like, it's still like, 12 days out. It's like, that's good.
That's pretty good. Yeah. Give someone 12 days notice on their rainy wedding. They can plan around it. So going back, like I usually like to talk about when you first started the company, but I feel like the story kind of starts probably back in Sweden. I know we were talking before we started recording. You grew up in Sweden. What did you like to do as a kid back in Sweden?
Oh, I like to code. I, I started coding 92. So my parents had an Apple Plus, Macintosh Plus. So I started coding, and it was like HyperCard. I don't know, do you know what that is? It's like a multimedia thing. It's kind of like Visual Basic in a way, but like Mac. So I figured out how to write code, and it was very basic, simple. But yeah, so I actually think a lot about like how grateful I am, because like back then I had no idea that I could make money from it. And I was thinking about like my friends, they were like trading hockey cards. That was their hobby. Like I was writing code, and like, look at me now. Like I'm like making a lot of money from my hobby. Like I actually very, very grateful about that in a way. So I don't know, I just kept coding throughout my childhood. Like I switched to JavaScript at some point, and Perl around like late 90s. Started doing C++. I discovered programming competitions when I was in high school, and discovered I was actually pretty good at it.
So what is a programming competition, especially back in, sounds like probably late 90s, early 2000s?
No, this was yeah, early 2000s. Yeah, you typically have like 5 hours to solve a bunch of problems. There's like slightly different formats. Sometimes it's like solo teams. Sometimes it's like 3 people. There's a bunch of different formats, but the core idea is like you have to solve like, I don't know, half a dozen to a dozen problem in like a few hours, or even sometimes just 3 problems. And it's usually like very algorithmic problems. They're very artificial. They're like super silly. It's always like there are N cows on a farm, and there's a graph that describes their movements. It's stupid, but like they're fun. Like I mean, they're like fun puzzles, and I don't know. I discovered I was pretty good at it, so I actually went to like this international. It's called IOI, International Olympiad in Informatics. It's my first time to the U.S. I went to Wisconsin.
Wow, the pride of the U.S. Like
I know. Yeah. America's Dairyland.
Yeah, exactly. In the Midwest, it's like right in the middle there.
No, it's funny. That was the first thing I saw from the U.S. was Milwaukee and something like that, Kenosha. This is Chicago. Anyway, so I did pretty well in that, and I kept going. I kept doing that throughout college too, and at university there was a bunch of other people doing it too, and then they joined this random startup called Spotify, and I was like, what are they doing? Like music streaming? I don't think that's ever going to work.
Yeah, isn't it illegal? Like it was illegal at the time, right?
Yeah, like I don't really think it make any sense. But like, but all of my like smart friends from school joined that company, so I was like, okay, I guess I'll join it too. And obviously now it's like whatever, Europe's biggest startup or something. But like I think of it as like so random. Like I kind of ended up there when it was about 40 people, I think, and ended up staying for about 7 years. So that was luck. I lucked out.
Yeah, and you did your master's thesis on music recommendation. Was that
I actually did it at Spotify.
Oh, you did it at Spotify. Okay.
I did it at Spotify. Yeah. And by the way, I didn't know anything about music recommendations. I was able to convince them. I'm like, hey, like, can I just come and like do some machine learning? And like, I didn't know anything about machine learning either. But they're like, yeah, cool. You seem smart.
It's just a math problem, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah, a lot of math problems. It's like a whole stack, 20 math problems together. So I did that, and I joined Spotify like full time early 2009. No, wait, whatever, something like that. 2000, yeah. So I ended up like initially like I was kind of ended up like working like business intelligence, which is actually kind of in hindsight I'm actually very happy about, because they were like, yeah, like music recommendations are cool, but now we have all these more pressing problems. Investors are asking for all these numbers. Actually, Erik, numbers. Can you do that? So I ended up spending like a year just like crunching numbers and just like generating charts for like investor decks and stuff like that. But it ended up being like super valuable like 10 years later when I was running a startup.
Oh, I've done this before. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of fun. Anyways, but eventually at Spotify, I ended up going back to music recommendation systems and built up a team around that.
So what's the most interesting thing or surprising thing about music recommendation systems that people might not know? Because when I think of Spotify, I think of the Discover playlists. Sometimes I find new stuff from how do they work? Like what would people want to know about that?
I think that maybe like people get a little bit surprised, maybe not, is that the recommendation systems have like no idea what they're like crunching. They just look at a bunch of like correlations. You basically like basically ended up using a lot of language models, but not in the way you might think. Like the language models know nothing about music or lyrics or anything like that. You just think of like individual songs as like words, and then you just look at the sequence of words, basically, like sequence of songs that people listen to, and then you're just trying to find patterns in that. It's essentially like a next token prediction problem, where the words are like individual songs, but like the songs are just like IDs. They're just in a big matrix. They're just like entries in a big matrix essentially. So it's called collaborative filtering. Basically, this idea that like you're just mining this like data set for correlations. And then basically how it works in practice is like you create a big matrix, then you factorize this matrix, and then you end up with vectors. So you get like vectors for the songs and vectors for users and playlists and artists and other stuff. And then I actually built a vector database at Spotify too. Open sourced it for a while. It was actually quite widely used, briefly used by Twitter and all these other companies. But yeah, so then you have to do like vector search but yeah, that's like the core idea. It's like you like put shit in a matrix, you factorize that matrix, then you get vectors, and then you do like nearest neighbor search in that like high dimensional vector space.
I think I read a blog post about how Spotify's music rec worked a while back. And maybe it was like a different version of this, but it was something like it basically just looks at who do you have a similar listening history or habit to, and then like what are they listening to?
Yeah, that's roughly right. Yeah. But you do it in a more statistical, like less direct way. It's like it doesn't exactly do that, but as a sort of like mental model, roughly.
And then what did you learn about just like building a culture at Spotify?
I think it was super formative. Spotify in the early days, there was like zero management. At least for me, I didn't even know who my manager was. I think that was actually bad. But
oh, jeez, that could be bad.
First 2 years, no one told me who was my manager. So I was like, that was my first job. So I didn't know what to expect. So, but I think it was actually ended up working out because there was a lot of smart people just like working on like hard problems, and people knew what we kind of needed to build, and we didn't need a lot of structure. So I always took that with me. Like I think most startups, like if you just have smart people who are like pretty autonomous and have like a mission, you need a lot less structure than you think. You can get by. Like people should just come in every morning and just ask themselves, what can I do for the business today? That's my sort of platonic ideal for what a startup should be. It's a little naive maybe, but like, aspirational maybe. You can get pretty close to that actually.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like the whole like, what did you get done this week thing? It's just like, did you actually accomplish anything? Like, go back, look, like, did anything change? Like, did you materially make a difference on anything? Like, if not, maybe revisit how you're spending your time.
Except with that phrasing feels like kind of like negative. You're like, what did you do today? It almost seems like you're expecting like, did you actually do anything? Like,
so what do you think is the correct phrasing? It's just go in and get shit done. Like, is that the right way? Or
what can I do for the business today? And like, what are you waiting for? Just do it.
Have you learned anything then from the Spotify days related to Modal?
A million things. How to build software, how to hire, I think another thing like Spotify did really well. It's kind of random, but like I think everything that Spotify did, not everything, but like it had like high taste. Like I feel like the design, the websites, like how we talked about the product, it's just like it's like a certain level of quality. And I remember like the first time you tried the product, like you clicked on a track and you're like, wait a minute, this is like in the cloud. Like that sort of like magic experience of like, whoa, like this is actually where like that's actually something you get in Modal too. Like you're like running some code. You're like, wait a minute, this code is running in the cloud. And like having that like kind of magic moment, and then like the whole kind of product and onboarding, like kind of designed around like getting people to that magic moment. And then like keeping the bar high for like what the product looked like and the design. Sometimes Spotify kind of lost that a little bit, but they eventually always came back to it. Like, just, it just, Spotify has this, like, they always like postured as like like a bigger company than they were, I felt like. And I think that's quite important. Like, you like visual language and how you talk about it and the identity and your voice. Like, you gotta seem like you're like a 1,000-person startup, even though you're like 10.
Yeah, the design aspect reminds me of did you ever use, like, LimeWire or any of those, like,
Yeah, all of them.
file downloaders? Yeah. And, like, you, like, search a song, and there'd be, like, 100 versions of it, and you, like, download probably a couple and, like, see which one sounded the best to keep. Versus with Spotify, it's like, you just know you're getting the song, and it's gonna be great, and there's not gonna be, like, some guy made a mixtape, and he has, like, his, like, intro credits rolled over it, or, like, sometimes it's, like, a different song.
I mean, like, people would put like fake songs sometimes, and like sometimes I download it and I listen to an album, but it turned out like two of the songs were actually like like the wrong song. And then when you switch to Spotify, you're like, wait a minute, is that actually this is the real song?
Yeah.
That happened to me a lot. Like, because people just like pollute. Maybe the labels did it just to like undermine streaming or downloading.
Yeah, just to get people to keep buying CDs for an extra year or two. And then so yeah, I think you kind of moved over to the US at some point while you're at Spotify, and then you helped start this company called Better.com.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, real quick for people who don't know what Better.com is, what was that one?
It was a mortgage lending startup. I think at some point I was like, I was at Spotify for 7 years. I was just kind of burnt out and wanted to try something new. And I was like, I'm going to try something completely different. So I ended up starting as part of the founding team at Better. Yeah, I think we were like 10 people when we started. But yeah, that was like a total roller coaster. We were like 10,000 people when I left 6 years, 5 years later. And then the company basically collapsed.
But it's public now. Like they got it public at some point.
Yeah, they to the credit of the founder, Vishal, like they were able to take it public a few years later, and randomly, actually, a couple of weeks ago, it kind of turned into almost like a meme stock. Stock went up like
Yeah,
3x.
I was looking. It looks like Open Door and Better are both kind of like going vertical.
No, it's so bizarre. It's so bizarre. So I don't know. I'm actually kind of bullish on the company in a way. Like I do feel like there's a space for innovation in the mortgage lending. I think with interest rates high, it's tough, and that's ultimately a lot of what made the company kind of almost like collapse. But I think it's still worthwhile. Like there's a lot of stuff in the housing industry that's just like fundamentally extremely broken in the U.S.
Yeah, and it's a very large percentage of
It's
GDP, and
enormous. It's crazy.
yeah, and for most people, it's the biggest purchase that they'll ever make. Like for 98%, 99% of Americans, and in most countries, like your house is your biggest asset. You work for a decade to save up to make a down payment. You put it in the house, you pay off the loan, and then that's your retirement. Like it is everyone's like fundamental, just like the value of their life that's accrued is like the value of the home.
No, it's crazy. It's so large, and so there's a lot of good reasons to think about this problem. But like ultimately, I think tech is just like one part of it. And I don't know. I was the CTO there for 5 years. I built a tech team. I took it from basically one person to like 300 or something like that. I learned a lot about management and hiring and all this stuff. Took a lot of stuff with me to Modal. But I don't know. I like now that I'm like in Modal, I'm like, this is like what I want to do. This is so much more fun. Better was fun too.
It seems like, based on what I know about you, this might be like a slightly more interesting problem for you to be working on, but still both important. And you mentioned you learned a bunch of stuff. What was? I mean, I'm assuming you've interviewed like thousands of people, hired hundreds, maybe you've hired 1,000 people at this point.
Not quite 1,000. I think I've hired maybe like 400, 300, 400, probably something like that.
Wow. Okay. So just like thinking back over the past, I don't know, decade or two of this, what have been like the biggest predictors of on the job success from hiring, or sorry, from an interview? I know it's like extremely difficult, but you have a blog post on your blog that's basically like you need to treat this as almost like a prediction problem of like figuring out probabilities of like what actually leads to success.
Exactly. Like that's at its core what it is, right? Like you're trying to predict their future performance. So I always feel like people are like, when they're criticizing interview processes, they're like, why are you doing these like weird brain teasers, like whatever? Like, who cares? Like, whatever predicts like future performance, maybe brain teasers don't do that, and that's like a valid criticism. But don't throw them out on the grounds that they're not like realistic work, because like that's actually besides the point. So the real thing here is like to predict like future job performance. And so what actually predicts future job performance? I don't know.
Okay.
No, I think it's important to be like humble about it because like I like the more I interview, actually, like I think there's like a false sense of confidence in the early days of hiring people. Like I thought I knew. I was like, yeah, this person is great. This person is not good. Like I've just realized it's very noisy. It's very noisy. It's very hard to predict. But the things I've learned, honestly, like the biggest thing is actually intelligence, and it's kind of boring, but like, and it's like hard to assess. But like when you work with a person for a long time, you generally like observe that like the smartest people, they'll always like just do better. So that's like kind of a boring answer. I think beyond that, like kind of after intelligence, like what else like predicts it? I would say like at startups at least, like I've seen this sort of like high agency, commercial, autonomous, like autonomy that tends to like be quite
That seems
important.
like it would kind of relate to your earlier point about just like what can you do for the business to like move it forward, kind of a thing. Like find an opportunity, close a deal, make money, save money, insert whatever moving business forward commercial objective.
Like being a little impatient. Like I like people who want to just like get stuff done. Like they want to, they're high agency and they just get stuff done. So I think that's pretty important. There's a lot of stuff like that. People are like fundamentally positive. Like I hate when I interview people and they're like complaining about stuff. Like I think that's kind of a bad negative trait. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff like that. I often like ask just like almost like seemingly random questions about to people and trying to see how well it holds up.
So what's the point? Like, what would be an example of that? Like, ask me one.
Like what's the hardest thing you ever did? Like what like tell me something you did in the last year that you're proud of.
Me personally,
Yeah, yeah, we're role playing here.
I mean, I figured out how to start making money from this podcast, which is not easy.
And how do you make money?
Sell sponsorships in the podcast. I mean, it's super simple, but
Okay,
also
and how do you sell sponsorships? Like, how have you learned about like sourcing sponsorships and winning those deals?
it's actually a lot easier than I thought it would be. It's just like a volume thing. You just got to be like, hey, I have this podcast a lot of people listen to. Here's the data.
Okay, what's the conversion rate when you reach out to people? What's the percentage of like sponsorship? Anyway, my point is like I just get asked like questions like that, and I just go super deep.
Some people like that though. Some people hate it.
The reason why like I like that question is like smart people like they're able to go like almost like arbitrarily deep, you know, like but like when people are like starting like it doesn't really hold up, like that's when like I get a little hesitant. Like it turns out like actually they don't know what they built themselves or so there's a lot of stuff like that you can do. I don't know, but fundamentally interviewing is hard.
Yeah, I actually want to finish answering that question because you'll see why in a second. What I found is that the people that are most likely to like convert on sponsorships in the podcast are people who follow me on Twitter or listen to the podcast. So it's like they kind of already know. Like when I bring it up to them, like, oh yeah, I'm in, and it's just you don't. There's like not really a big back and forth, and you have to like sell them pitches. Just like they've been listening to it or they've been following it. So if you're listening right now and you want to sponsor the podcast, respond to the email, comment, DM me on Twitter, whatever you need to do.
By the way, your answer was like a great interview question answer, right? Like because it sounds like it made me seem like you've thought deeply about the problem and you observe patterns and like you come to realize something, right?
Yeah, I think just generally, sometimes just trying to go out of your comfort zone is so hard. Sometimes, like for me personally, like I just never done it before, and you're kind of there's almost this there's somewhat of like a fear of failure, and you just have to kind of do it. And then once you do it, you're like, oh, this is actually way easier than I thought.
Yeah.
I email someone, we get on a call, and they give me like 20 grand. It was pretty cool. Like that feels pretty good. Like it's an extremely high ROI. So then it like motivates you to do it more. So I think it's kind of like for any hard thing, it's like figuring out like what the dopamine like unlock is, or what like the part of it that you like, and just like figuring out how to get to that point. And you have to do the hard stuff. I mean, there's every job that you have. Like one of my first bosses told me this. I worked at a private equity firm and my as an intern, and my job was literally to cold call investment banks and be like, hey, do you have any deal flow for us? Like it was the stupidest thing. Like it was 0% conversion rate. People were like, why is this like 20-year-old kid calling me asking for companies to invest in? Like this is not how it works.
Yeah. Sales is like that for me, by the way. Like I had to do a lot of it. By the way, that's why Mormons are so good at sales. Like I love Mormons. because they have to like go for like 3 years to Europe.
Yeah, and like just try to convert you to their religion that's a little different than most other religions.
And like I admire that so much. Like they're just, so many people saying no to them. And they just like learn to like, okay. And then,
Yeah. I feel like that's the thing is like when you're selling anything, it's not like nothing's like a hard no. And if you're just getting hard no's, you're almost doing it wrong. Like you kind of think of it more of like a discovery process or like a, what's their problem? Can you solve it? And in some cases they might just like not have your problem. Like if I'm a restaurant owner and I like, it's like some one-off non-chain, I sell like Indian food and you come to me and try to sell me Modal, I'll be like, no, like you shouldn't even be talking to me. Like it's just about figuring out who actually has the problem. And then the bigger the problem is and the more relevant, like that's who you should be fishing for.
I think it's like you're bringing up a really interesting point about like starting companies, by the way. I think a lot of founders make this mistake. They go and talk to a lot of potential customers and then try to like land those as like design partners. And people are like, yeah, like this is not quite what we need, but if you do this thing, then maybe we would do it. Like if you support like on-prem, we would consider it. And then people are like, oh, on-prem. Okay. Like, so we need that as like our MVP. And like people end up with this like ridiculous like MVP. Like you should disqualify a lot of people when you're talking to potential customers.
Really? So when you're first, so this is maybe like a good transition into Modal. But so when you were starting it, did you get that a lot?
No, I actually like took a terrible approach in hindsight. I just like decided I'm just gonna take my own experience and just like sit for 2 years and build a product that I wanted to have. That's a very different approach.
But you probably tuned out a lot of noise of like somebody might have given you feedback like, oh, we need on-prem, and you're like, it's not, we don't need that.
Screw that. Yeah.
So it's almost like you were your own customer really at the end of the day. Like you're building the product.
Exactly, right? And I think that's maybe different because I maybe started my company a little bit later in my career because like I felt like at that point, like I'd already, like I kind of spent enough years like on the application side that I kind of knew what I wanted from the infra side. But yeah, I think for most people, it's probably better to spend a bunch of times like talking to potential customers.
Yeah. So then I know you described it as like you were just kind of like heads down building for like a year or two. What was that like? Like, were you trying to find market pull, or were you literally like 16 hours a day, don't talk to anyone, just building it, and then you got to the end of the tunnel?
Not quite 16, but because I have kids and a wife and stuff. But
probably like 12, right?
Yeah, something like that, right? So I was just Let's also remember like this was during the ZERP era, like kind of late pandemic. So like we took a little bit of seed money, and people were like kind of like, yeah, it was cool. Like you're building some hard stuff. But like that being said, like I do feel like there's a little bit of like sometimes disconnect where like I think if you're starting a startup, you should pick a hard problem. Like you should almost like pick something that like kind of takes like a year to two. Like I don't know. That's the challenge I have with when I look at a lot of YC startups. They're pushing them so hard to find PMF like
instantly, like within a week or two. Yeah.
Like I'm like that doesn't happen for most startups, and so I think it leads to a certain amount of startups, like certain type of startups. But like that's not the startup that I wanted to start. Like I wanted to build something that takes like a couple of years to build, because then I know there's a little bit of a moat also. There's something more durable there.
Because if you build Modal, like, oh, that seems cool. Like, I'm gonna build it too. Like, I'm gonna do it like vibe code it in a night, and then start stealing your customers.
Yeah.
So you got like a year or two of just building this thing, and it was Stable Diffusion was like the first thing where it really started to take off.
That's right. Yeah. Like we sort of targeted we always had this like very general purpose approach. We're like, we're going to build something that like works for everyone that builds stuff with machine learning data and AI. And we weren't really sure, well, what's the killer app? And that turned out to be Stable Diffusion, which I think was somewhat serendipitous because like Stable Diffusion wasn't around when we started the company. So we ended up being a little lucky in that sense. I think we would have found something else, but I don't think revenue would have been where it is today if it hadn't been for all the Gen AI stuff. So we were a little bit lucky in that sense.
So then how has the product kind of evolved over time? Like, was there like a specific first thing that you kind of built that people were using, or like, how did you kind of ladder up?
We started out with this like very general purpose product, right? And like I said, we didn't really know what we were like, what was the killer app. And then Stable Diffusion ended up being that. And then that pulled us super hard in the direction of like inference and like specifically like Gen AI inference. But in a way, we're kind of gone full circle because I think in 2025, roughly, we kind of came back to the idea of like, no, like this is a general purpose platform. And so now, and we also have way more engineers now. So we can like
build more stuff.
Yeah. I mean, when you have like 5 engineers and like you find product market fit, you don't have a choice. Just like chase that shit. Like just, like just go for it. Right. Like, but when you have like, now we have like, I don't know, 45 engineers or something like that. Now we can actually afford to also like build a little bit more like kind of speculative stuff. And so we are kind of very much going back to this original idea of like, no, we're trying to build a general purpose platform. We're trying to build an infrastructure layer. And there's so many other parts of that. We're focusing a lot on training. We released the notebooks product recently. Sandboxes, like I said.
What's notebooks?
It's basically like the idea of like, similar to like Google Colab or, Jupyter or things like that. Like there's more idea like you have like kind of a graphical, like instant feedback thing in your web browser. We can just write some code and like plot stuff and run code and get like more like instantaneous feedback, like from inside the web browser. And you can share that with other people. It's not really necessarily meant for like production use cases, but it's meant for like more like interactive exploratory stuff.
Like testing things?
Yeah, like playing around and like trying out like quick and dirty prototypes and I don't know, plotting stuff.
Interesting. So then as you were kind of like building the product, I know you mentioned earlier making it super simple in some cases, but also infrastructure is hard. Like you also mentioned all this stuff is hard. Like how did you decide when to make the product super simple and kind of abstract things away, but then also kind of keep it complex when it needs to be complex? Like was there any kind of secret to that?
I don't like the way simple. I also don't like the word democratize. Like there's like a bunch of words like I try to avoid when I talk about the product. Because like I think a challenge with like a lot of infra products is they take away a lot of the possibilities. Like basically you want to reduce the burden on the developer by like 90%. You want to like collapse the amount of effort it takes to build these things. But like if you're also removing the ability to build stuff by like the same amount of percentage, like then there's no like
it's not worth it almost.
Yeah. So like I think you want to retain, I don't know, 90% of the possibility space while like reducing the complexity by 90%. So I don't necessarily think of it as simplification. I think of it as like finding the right abstractions that enable people to build things faster. And like we always focus like very intentionally on like, I think it was like high code use cases. We go to like the power users, the machine learning engineers, the people running the models, training the models, like running really complex stuff. And we look at what they're doing and like, we want all of that to run on Modal, but we want it also to take a lot less effort. So it's hard to find those abstractions. I think in a way, like by sacrificing a lot of the backend workloads, that helped us focus a lot more on AI. And that like, I think it's very important that like, at least for me, like, or how we think about Modal is to pick a persona and like a problem space and think about like, okay, what exists in that problem space and build for that. And when you pick a problem space, then I think it gets a lot easier to make those, simplifications. I don't like the word. This is by the way a challenge with the cloud providers. The cloud providers, by the way, the hyperscalers, they're trying to build for everyone at the same time. And if you build for everyone at the same time, it's actually really hard to optimize for any particular audience.
So yeah, so it sounds kind of like to your point when you're at Spotify, it's like you spent so much time just setting things up and building the infrastructure. So it's like making it so they don't have to spend setup time to like customize an environment or like a production run or a training run, like whatever the thing is.
Exactly. Yeah.
So they can still do specific, like unique, hard to do things, but just like abstracting away the manual, boring, less creative aspect of it or something like that.
Yeah. Keep the power, but like reduce all the garbage.
So then was there certain points like on the roadmap, like are you getting a lot of feedback from customers? Like how do you decide when to listen to them, what to build? Like has that been a big thing you've had to figure out, or is it still just kind of like you guys kind of know?
No, we talk to like once we emerged from that cave, then we started talking to customers all the time, and we have a big Slack community.
Yeah, how do you decide what to prioritize?
It's very hard. I think when you talk to customers, you should take their pain points extremely seriously, but when they suggest solutions, you should almost like ignore that.
I've heard that before, yeah.
Because like customers will be like, oh yeah, like, can you do this feature for us? Like, we'd really want that. And then like, you kind of have to ask them, well, what is the problem here? Like, what are you trying? And then kind of go back like a few steps. And then you identify, okay, they're having an issue with this. And that's, and then you have to think for yourself, well, like maybe there's a much better, more general solution actually. And so Yeah, and then the second problem is like prioritization. And by the way, prioritization is like just incredibly hard, and like I think there's no way around it because like we have 45 engineers right now. Of course, we can do more stuff, but by the way, if I had 1,000 engineers, I would still like struggle with like I would want to build a moon rocket and like whatever space laser and like all these other things. Like it just never ends. So like you just have to be super ruthless about picking the like 2 to 3 things that are like existential for the company and just like that is probably where you should spend time at any point in time.
And you mentioned that just kind of like the rise of the importance of inference changed a lot. What kind of happened there? Like what were people starting to use it for? And then how did that kind of impact the company?
Yeah, so all these generative media models and other things like large language models and things. And I think a lot of the focus traditionally on AI, at least in the last 5 years or so, has been on training. But as like people put these models into production, they need inference. Inference is a little bit harder because, unlike training where you're actually kind of fine with having like a fixed amount of resources, like a static amount of GPUs. But when you're doing inference, you can't fundamentally predict how much. I mean, you can estimate, but like you have like very volatile demand. So one of the kind of value propositions of Modal, like where we like part of the reason why I think we found a good market is that in inference is that we solve that for you. And so you don't necessarily have to think about capacity, right? And so there was a sort of realization like there's like kind of a fast growing market here in inference, which is why we invested so much in the last few years in inference. We still invest, by the way. There's so much still to be done. But that's why I think like inference has been like a good space for us.
And is this a good way to think about inference? Like training is just like your brain, and then inference is like using your brain or something, or like it's like doing things.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, always trying to get a better understanding. Plus, also sometimes people will like reply to the emails I send, like then they'll be like, "What does this thing mean?" And it was like a basic concept in the conversation. I was like, "Oh fuck, I probably should have explained that." So, like to try to as we go be like, "Hey, this is actually what inference is." By the way, for people who don't know. And so then when you think about like the future of modal and like AI development and all this stuff, where is it kind of going over the next couple years, in like 10 years, 20 years? I don't know if that's even possible to predict, but how do you think about how this stuff is, yeah, how's it all evolving?
I always thought of Modal as my 20-year project, by the way. So like for me, it's always, I always made, I have a lot of ideas. I don't know how it's all going to unfold. I, I think of like, there are so many things around like AI development and like, or like more broadly, like working with just like compute resource intensive problems. That kind of goes beyond just training and inference. Like there's the entire life cycle, right? And when you start to think about that, like there's many other things. There's like data pre-processing, which we actually have some customers doing. There's training, there's inference, but there's also other things. There's like a lot of observability. There's like features stores. There's real-time streaming data pipelines. There's, eventually, if you want to start working on more like data stuff, there's a lot of things around query engines, like working with like more like databases, more like primitives for like structured data. So I think when I look down the road like 3 to 5 years, my goal is like if you're building an AI application, you can do the entire thing on Modal, like the entire thing. We have all the software tools you need, and we do it, by the way, much better than anyone else because we control the underlying infrastructure and it's all like super well integrated too. So that's kind of my like hand wavy vision for what I want to get to.
So it's sort of like traditionally, if you're not using modal, there's almost like multiple tools you have to stitch together, and there's like trade-offs between how things sync versus modal. You're almost like the full stack of it, so you will get a better, more succinct, faster experience. Are there any ways you like might fall short with that approach, like that someone can provide a different or a product that might be considered better if somebody wants everything, like cost or something like that? Or
I mean, I think cost is always going to be. I, we try not to compete too hard on cost, and that's always like fundamentally. I think if like people want to run something at like absurd scale and they're willing to do all the hard work that it takes to like get the absolutely lowest cost, yeah, I mean, probably like they're going to be able to like go buy their own data center and like whatever, buy their own power plant and like if people are willing to like spend an enormous amount of effort, like they can always lower cost. So we try to strike like a happy medium where like most companies are probably better, like way better off using Modal because they can just iterate so much faster And I think ultimately that's like what people care about. It's like, maybe it gets like 30% more expensive with Modal, but maybe that's fine because engineers are way more happy. They can ship things to production much faster. In a way, we've been in this like weird paradigm in the last like 5-10 years with AI, which I don't love, where like I call it the carbon to silicon cost ratio. Like the chips are more expensive than the humans. The humans are the carbon and the chips are the silicon.
Okay, yeah, that makes
Right.
sense.
So it's like right now, like that's the challenge, right? Like, so what it means when the humans are the chips are more expensive than the humans, there's like no consideration paid to like how much does it take an engineer, and but like when it's the other way around, when the labor is more expensive than the silicon, then like yeah, take more chips, like whatever, like we can run things at a little bit less efficiency. Let's use a higher level language, like whatever, in order to like make engineers move faster. And I think like we've been a little bit too far on the like to the extreme of like optimizing for like GPU efficiency in the last few years. And I think, as we make, engineers more important again, I think there's going to be a lot of premium people are going to want to pay for like just the ability to move fast and have good developer experience and shipping stuff into production.
Yeah, I'm definitely curious on your opinion on that. But I feel like one thing I learned, I just want to like I took like a business strategy class. It was like my last semester of college or whatever. And my biggest takeaway was you basically have to figure out, do you compete on like a different, unique, better product, or do you compete on cost? So it's like, are you the lowest cost provider? It's probably the shittiest product, honestly. Maybe not, but like, are you the cheapest or are you the most expensive because you're the best? And it's like, if you get caught in the middle, you become like, you might say something like Walmart would be like low cost. Like, it's like you go in, you know what you're going to get. It's not fancy, but it's cheap. And on the high end, it's like Canada Goose or something. They're like the $1,000 jackets, right? It's like just premium. They're most expensive, but it's like so warm, so comfy. And then in the middle is like J.C. Penney or like Kohl's, where it's like they kind of have fancy things, but they don't have the most scale. So like they're not really the lowest cost. And it's like it just kind of sucks, and no one goes there. So you die basically.
Yeah. Yeah. But like look at another market, look at Android versus iOS.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Android has like kind of found like a niche in like low cost, but Apple is conquering everything else and like making way more money, by the way, like than Android. So like I don't know. I think depending on which market you look at, like sometimes there's like 25 players, like in retail, but in technology it has to be like one or two players. And I don't think it's necessarily evident like, that being low cost or being high cost is like the best model. I think in iPhones, like that actually goes pretty far down the spectrum and they make way more money. But of course, like if you really, really want to save money, you're going to go buy an Android.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, if you look at iOS, like I feel like they almost like continue to move up market in the sense of like the phone just continues to get more expensive, but then also they're like, I feel like they're slowly creeping down into the lower end of like just more and more people just like as a percentage of humans are buying iOS devices. And then also like, you have tablets, you have the watches, you also have the laptops, like MacBooks. So I think I saw a stat. This is from a couple of years ago. I think they have over 1 billion devices active around the world. So they're probably just like the top 10%, 20% of like like North America, Europe, Australia, Japan, South Korea, like those like most developed, highest GDP per capita nations. And those people have money to spend on games and in-app purchases and Apple cards, whatever, however Apple's making money. It's from all those top 20% of income earners. So then how did you think when you were building sort of the brand for Modal? I know that was a pretty important sort of like intentional thing you've done over the past couple of years, but how do you just generally think about as a startup, maybe specifically as a developer platform? Like how do you think about building a brand and your go-to-market?
In certain ways, it was like very intentional. In certain ways, it was like not at all. We haven't had a marketing team or a sales team until like very recently. So a lot of basically our early customer acquisition was like me tweeting shit and like, talking about the product. It's like founder-led marketing, I call it, right? So, and it sort of works. And I think, we ended up being very PLG, almost like unintentionally, without me necessarily thinking deeply about it, because I always built consumer products. I think today there are such a lost opportunity for so many companies to have just like a boring brand, like an enterprise infrastructure and SaaS and stuff like that. Like my theory is like the era of like boring brands is like over. People want to buy a product that makes them feel cool, that makes them feel like they're like working with something that like the cool kids use. So I think it's such a lost opportunity to not be out there and have a voice and have an identity and be like a little quirky and like kind of carve out your own niche and like how you talk about the product. And so I don't know. We always try to have we try to be approachable, but also try to be a little cool. And I think it's important as you build out a brand to really think about that. And I don't know, there's so many products out there, especially in enterprise SaaS, that are so boring. Like you go to the website, it's like download the white paper,
Book a demo with the sales team.
like, and I think that's just not, it's not the way that these products are good. Like, I mean, and I don't think we're the only one to notice that, right? Like, I think there are some really exciting brands out there. Versal is a great one. Planet Scale, I love what they're doing. Very crazy website. There are like, these like new generation of products that are like just taking a very different approach to branding and marketing. And I love that.
Oh yeah, I'm on the Planet Scale website. It almost looks like it borrows a little bit from like MS DOS.
Exactly. But that's the point, right? They're like speaking to developers. Like it's like very clear when you go to that website. It's like, oh, like cool. Like this is different. Like, I don't know. I mean, it's like weird, but I think it appeals to developers. Developers are very finicky. It's hard to sell to developers. And maybe that's also like a different buying pattern. Maybe like 10 years ago, it was more like CTOs and CISOs and whatever buying the products. But today it's developers paying for the product and they want the cool product and they want to work with the product that makes them feel cool. And so I think it's a different way to sell software today.
I feel like developers are just smart too. Like if your product sucks or what, like they're just not going to use it because they have a choice. They can be like, I'm not going to use this shitty one that I can't even integrate properly. Like just give me the one that just works because I got shit to do.
Yeah, exactly. And I think they see through like marketing fluff. Like I always like push, when we write up content, I'm, like high performance, blah, blah. I'm like, what does the high performance mean? Like developer, like as a developer, you're like, unless there's less like a very like specific meaning, like don't write the word because it just like sounds like fluffy.
So then if I'm just getting started on sort of, I don't know, building in public, tweeting things out, building my marketing strategy for like PLG bottoms up like that, like how would you recommend getting started? I know you kind of blogged for a while and tweeted for a while before starting the company. Like, is that probably the best way to go? Like just start today, like start 5 years before you start the company?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, right? Like that being said, I mean, like I think like everyone has to find their own journey. like, I think like everyone's go-to-market journey. Every company is gonna have their own like idiosyncratic thing. And like when you listen to like podcasts of like founders saying, "Oh, like we like discovered that influencers or we discovered whatever," like you always have to like discount that a little bit and like because I think everyone has to find their own kind of journey. For us, it just ended up being kind of leaning into the stuff we're good at, which is like I already kind of had a distribution channel through my blogging and tweeting. So if you're asking for yourself, I mean, you have a lot of Twitter followers. I would absolutely do that, right? Like if you have a lot of following online, like you should absolutely lean into that. If you don't, like, I mean, there's other stuff, right? Like, some other companies have found like very different pathways to user acquisition.
Well, it's probably also what are you good at? Like, are you a great public speaker? Just go speak at some conferences and wow the crowd and get them to sign up. Or like, if you like podcasting, start a podcast, go on some podcasts. If you hate podcasting, don't do that. It's just whatever you're good at is probably the way to think about it. Because it's like it's super hard. Like I think that's the main thing if you're thinking about starting something. It's like it's probably going to be 100 times harder than you even conceptualize. So you better make sure that you enjoy it and that you're good at it because, you know, it just increases your chances of success if you can stick with it and you pick stuff that you have an advantage in versus everybody else.
Yeah, and especially if you enjoy it. Like I'm always like shit posting anyway, so like I might as well write about Modal.
And you mentioned you guys had raised some money. I think you mentioned it was ZERP. Sort of, I think that's probably like the first round. What's sort of like fundraising journey? I know you announced a Series B by the time this comes out, maybe like a couple weeks, a month before this episode came out. But what's fundraising been like, and any just general advice for people thinking about raising money?
Yeah, so fundraise. We raised the seed round. Actually, they raised two seed rounds back in 2022. And then the A round, the seed rounds was primarily from Amplify. Then the A round was from Red Point. That was 2023. And then we didn't raise for almost 2 years. We did a small safe round in between, but then we did a Series B recently with Alexis leading. I think fundraising, like, I don't know, like me personally, I like to keep things lean. I don't like the overhang of a lot of capital. I actually feel like I work better with like little capital and like, forcing myself to like really like use that capital well to get to the next round. So I'm not a big fan of these like mega rounds that have happened recently. I will say though, like to some extent, it's like also a function of the market. Like as the market is heating up, like we felt that like at some point you just have to play the game the market is playing.
Yeah, you need some amount of capital if everyone else has hundreds of millions or billions. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. So to some extent, it's like you can't choose your game. You can play the game, by its own rules, and you have to figure out the rules and play by them. But at the end of the day, like if competitors are out there raising a lot of money, you kind of have to do that too. It's just the market heating up. You go from this like blue ocean to red ocean or whatever. Things just heat up. It's a different game. Early in the creation of a company, typically if you're building something new, there is no category, and like so don't raise like a ton of money.
Is it harder though to raise if something doesn't exist? Like you're like, hey, we're building this thing, and like there's no comps for people to compare it to. So you kind of got to like sell the story to them about why this is going to be like a massive, $100 billion company in the future.
Probably, but I mean, today you can just say it's AI, right? I mean, but like, sure, like like yes, like we probably had the benefit of like getting credibility as a team. Like I think in the early days, like when Modal raised money, like yes, we didn't go and raise money without any sort of experience. Like I don't know. I was in my late 30s when I raised money, and I think people looked at my experience and like, yeah, like seems good.
Yeah, why not? Like, seems like he might know what he's talking about.
Yeah, so there was a little bit of that. So my point is just like it's probably easier for me to say, but sure. I think for most people, maybe you need to have a little bit more traction, and maybe like if you're like in your early 20s and have like zero experience, like maybe YC is good for you because like it forces you to find product market fit very early, and that's always like easier in a way to raise money based on. When you're building something hard that takes like several years, I think investors need a little bit more like of a belief in the team and the technology in order to like put in money.
Yeah. I mean, I think a very under discussed reason of startup failure is that you just kind of like lose faith or like give up. Like you're just like, I don't really want to work on this anymore. And if something's super hard and it takes you 2, 3, 4 years, that's a hard thing to underwrite for the investors of like, will they even stick with it to even figure like build the thing and then it actually starts of like building the company around the thing that they build. So
Yeah, it's also hard to find a problem that's hard but not impossible, and like knowing that.
well, I think something you mentioned the other day when we were talking, you said that you think probably too many people start companies in their 20s and they don't start them enough in their 30s or 40s. I don't know if I got that quote right.
I think something like that. I don't know. Maybe it's just me being like sad that I didn't start a company earlier in my life, but like I'm very happy I started a company. But I was like 37 when I started Modal, right? Like, but on the other hand, like starting a company when I was 37, like it's been a lot easier because I know how to hire. I know, what good looks like. I know how to build products. I know how to manage tech teams and how to, a lot of stuff is like so much easier. Like I don't necessarily need to, just learn those things on the job. Some stuff I have to learn on the job, but so I don't know. My feeling is like there's a lot of people out there, like kind of like me in my, when I was in my mid to late 30s, like they're just like really smart and really good at what they're doing, and they should just quit their jobs and start company. And the only reason why I did that was like for a while, my previous company had a tiny bit of an exit. Like I was able to sell some stock and take a year off and like jam on stuff. But so I really wish, I think there's a lot of people out there in their 30s who, if they had a little bit of money, maybe they, would take the risk and do that. And I think that would be awesome for society because I think there's so many smart people out there with great ideas, and we just need to push them a little bit.
Is it harder though when you're like married with kids? I don't know. I don't know how many kids you said you have, but yeah, because I personally,
I think it would have been hard to start company when my kids were like newborn. So when I started Modal, my youngest had just turned 2 or 3, and she just started sleeping. And I think that was like a massive difference. Like
Yeah.
my IQ like
Just
went
like
back up.
10x increase, in productivity.
Yeah, no, it was terrible for a while when they weren't sleeping. I don't know, you know, but now it's good.
Yeah. Well, speaking of being more productive, I know you have a really strong opinion on like how to make developers more productive. What's your general thinking on developer productivity?
I think it's super hard to measure. Although actually, like one thing I think is like lines of code is actually not a terrible metric. That's like something I need to like write more about. But like
That was my favorite thing from the Twitter takeover with Elon. He's just like print off the code, and people were like making fun of it, but it's like how big is the stack? Like, are you actually writing code, or is there like nothing there?
I think that's right. But like I also think the reason why it worked is like I suspect the median lines of code was 0. Like I think there's a lot of people
Exactly. Yeah.
who like actually didn't write code at all.
Yeah.
And I think that's like into, but by the way, that's actually something like I think culture has shifted a little bit. Sorry, we're getting on a sidetrack here, but like that managers write code. I think for like the last, maybe like 5 years ago, that wasn't necessarily evident. But like now I think it's kind of shifted back. And there's like more of an expectation that like, yeah, like managers should also write code. Like I still write code, by the way, at Modal. But anyway, going back to developer productivity, like I said, like it's hard to measure. The only thing I think is like kind of gets close to it is like just, or like the thing that I've like sort of empirically learned is like kind of gets to it is like, how fast are your feedback loops? And by that, I mean, like, if you have an idea, or maybe an even better example is like, if you know that there's a bug on your website and it's an obvious fix, how long does that take to fix? And I think it's like incredibly dysfunctional if you can't get it out with, in like a couple of minutes or like an hour, like active time, like, right. Just, if you know what the fix is, of course, like just fix it and just deploy it. And like, sure, maybe it takes like half an hour and run its CI/CD test suite or whatever, like get it out. But like the way a lot of companies operate is like you write up like a linear ticket or like whatever, Jira, and then like a product manager has to prioritize it. And then it goes back to some other engineer, and then they have to write something, and then they send over to some other one for code review. And then it takes like a day or two for that person to review the code, and then it goes back to me, and then I merge it. And then like 3 days later, there's a deploy. And, by now you're talking like 2 weeks of work. That's absurd. Maybe not like 2 weeks of active work, but like adding up all those
Of
steps.
time. Yeah. All the different like passes off between people. I mean, you just mentioned there's like 3 or 4 different people that had to get involved to fix a bug.
It's insane. So all these like handover points, like it just adds like a tax to all these steps. And that's like, especially for like small features, that tax becomes like, now like 1,000%. And so I think it's very important to like, reduce that tax on every step and make it possible for engineers to get obvious code out in production as fast as possible.
So one thing you mentioned was code reviews. I was talking to your co-founder, Akshat. Is that how you say it?
Akshat, yeah, that's right.
Akshat, yeah. He's like, you got to ask him about code reviews. I have no idea what you're going to say, but what's your opinion on code reviews based on what you just said?
I'm not anti-code reviews. I think, first of all, I do want to point out like a very common misconception is that some people somehow think that code reviews are mandated by a bunch of compliance standards. That is not true. Like people think this, and that's something people like internalize. They're like, well, obviously we do code reviews, like we have to because of like compliance. That is not true. You don't need to. Like as long as you have like a well-defined business reason for every line of code that goes into production, as long as you have like an audit log or like why did you push this code, that's fine. Like I think there are like some benefits to code review, like spreading knowledge, like stuff like that. But like what I think is an anti-pattern is like people sometimes I think just use code reviews to like absolve themselves of the responsibility if something breaks. They're like, oh, like I don't want to merge this into production myself because what if something breaks? Like then I kind of want to point to this other person also. Like that I think is like super bad. And I actually think in practice, a lot of like why people like code review is like they feel like by like doing the code review, they don't have full responsibility anymore.
Yeah, and if you have multiple people involved, like if there's like 3, 4, 5, 6, like the more people, the less individual unit of responsibility you have. Like everyone can just say,
yeah, I think that's very dangerous when people just use it as a way to get to that. But I mean, there's some benefits. Like sometimes I go and like change some code in like a code base that I don't fully understand. And like, I kind of want someone to take a look at it just to make sure I didn't like screw something up. Right. Like, or if like, you have an intern, like they're writing a bunch of code maybe the intern hasn't thought about all the security implications or whatever. Like, yeah, you should probably have like a senior person kind of taking a look. I don't know. There's a lot of reasons why I think a lot of code review, like, it gets like internalized as this like, cargo cult process, and I think that's quite bad.
So I actually have his name's Dax Gupta at Greptile. I don't know if you're familiar with Greptile. They're like a AI code review platform. Yeah, I'm actually having him on the podcast. Meet him in like 2 weeks. So that one will be coming out. I think probably like a week or two after this one does. So that'll be interesting. I'm interested to get his take on code review. Obviously, that's the whole business, but it kind of lies into the point of how AI is automating coding, and obviously, that case it might be a little bit more necessary to have some code review with AI. I don't know what's your opinion on how that's kind of all changing.
Like AI coding,
Yeah, like I mean, it sounds like a lot of stuff's getting automated.
a lot of stuff is getting automated. I don't know. I mean, like, I use Cursor to write code, and it's like it works well for certain stuff, not so well for other stuff. Like, I suck at Rust, but like thanks to Cursor, I can actually write like okay Rust, because like anytime I run into compiler error, it just like fixes all the borrowing stuff, and I'm like, okay, great. It's great for like weird SDKs. Like the other day, I needed to pull some data from Azure's SDK, and like I asked Cursor, and it kind of wrote up like a bunch of code, and like kind of worked. I had to remove like 25 try except, because it injects all this like stupid error handling. And then like sometimes it works for like mechanical refactorings and stuff like that, but sometimes it also fails spectacularly. So like I don't know, man. Like I don't know. I feel like for most day-to-day stuff, it's not the sort of 10x. I don't know. Like I find that like AI coding makes me, I don't know, 10, 20, 30% more productive, but that's it. By the way, that's not necessarily that much more than like coffee.
True, yeah. And there's a reason coffee is like, what is Starbucks? Starbucks is like worth a couple hundred
Yeah,
million.
yeah. I was tweeting something about that. I mean, it's like, yeah, like exactly, right?
I mean, I got my coffee right here, so
Python, like switching from like, I don't know, Perl to Python or whatever. This may be a bad example, but like I think there are new tools coming out. If you look like 30 years ago, like to now, like there've been like new tools coming out like every 5 to 10 years, and they all like make engineers like 10, 20, 30, 50% more productive, and it all adds up. Actually, it all multiplies up. It's all like adds up on a logarithmic scale. So like engineers today, I think, are like 10x more productive than they were like in the 90s or even more. And I think AI is like represents a new tool, and it's like actually really good. But I think it to me, it's not necessarily like fundamentally different than like what's already been happening over the last 30 years with engineers being more and more productive. And by the way, if you look at the last 30 years, employment of engineers just keeps going up. There's more and more engineers in society. And like, I don't know, I sort of expect that trend to continue for another few decades at least. I think there's just so much software that has to get built, so many bad websites and so much bad stuff out there. Like, I think we're going to need a lot more engineers over the next decades.
yeah. Well, I had Aaron Levy, the founder of Box, on the podcast, and he was like, if you're just like a rational CEO and you realize that these engineers are getting better and more productive, why would you just like lay them off and cut your spending? Like you should be hiring more and building more, because the more productive they get, like any rational capital allocators, they're looking at the ROI. They're going to be investing more there. So it's almost like, yeah, if it actually works, you're going to hire more. There's going to be more engineers.
I think what's going on is like there was a lot of bloat that happened like pre-pandemic and during the pandemic, and a lot of companies were quite bloated. And then there was a lot of layoffs, and people look at Twitter and they're like, yeah, like Twitter, Elon laid off 90%, and it's still operating. And like there is some truth to that. Like I think a lot of companies got kind of bloated, but that's like actually pre-AI. Like that's sort of unrelated. And so I think there's been a little bit of a bump in like engineering employment, but I think it's like it's going to continue.
Yeah, I'm sure people have seen those, like the subreddits, like people working multiple jobs. I've like always read those, and like, these people trolling, like this guy brags about having like 5 jobs at once, like all the keyboards.
Like it's like a few weeks ago, like people started on Twitter. They're like, oh yeah, like Sorum, like we hired him and then we had to fire him. And then like 25 other people piled in. They're like, yeah, like
Yeah, yeah. And I actually met a guy. This just like we host like some board game nights just with some friends. I met a guy who's just like casually telling me he has 2 jobs. I'm like, whoa, I've never actually met one of these people before in person. And he's just like, yeah, they don't know. Neither one knows. I get the work done, but it's like you make like double the money, right? You go like you just stack. You make 200K here, 200K here, whatever. Like extra, make 400 grand a year, whatever your salary is. But it's interesting because like you think the first job, it just covers all your living expenses or whatever. And that second job, it's just free money. And it's not like you're paying double the rent, double the car insurance, food expenses. Like it's just like it's like 10x more enticing to get that next job because it's just all, cash flow to the bottom line. It's pretty high margin as an individual.
That to me though, like I mean, great for that person, by the way. But like that to me signals to me that like there's a lot of like still like bad management of software engineers. The fact that like those two companies still haven't realized like this guy is like actually not contributing at the level of like a software engineer, to me that's like insane, right?
Yeah. One of them was big tech, one of them was the government. So
Yeah. So that doesn't surprise me at all.
they're probably like, they barely even have the internet connected and half their stuff. Like most their software probably doesn't even work properly. So you mentioned something that I thought was pretty interesting. You said you're both really bullish on AI, but you're also kind of bearish at the same time. I feel like that's maybe a common sentiment with a lot of people. Like, how do you kind of rationalize sort of what's going on? Like, what are you most excited about? What is kind of giving you pause right now in the industry?
Yeah, and like the more I like sort of talk to other people, I actually think, like you said, it's not necessarily an uncommon view. I think there are so many cool applications out there. And like the other thing that like I've been like so shocked by is like how much revenue there is in everything. If you had asked me like a year ago, like what's the revenue in like vibe coding or like APIs for speech transcription or like whatever, like
Like a couple $1,000,000. I don't know. Like,
it's like the fact that like there's probably like combined revenue of like $500 million a year today in like vibe coding. It's like mind blowing, right? And these are people they're paying for value they're getting, right? Like, or like another example is like Suno, right? Like I would have never anticipated that like the revenue, the opportunity for like AI generated music was, I actually have no idea what they're making, but like and like what makes me bullish is like those people, they don't care about if there's an AI bubble or not. They're paying because they get value from a product, right? On the other hand, the things that makes me a little bit bearish is like when I see the enormous amount of capital going into AI startups and AI infrastructure, I feel like is that revenue actually going to like match? Sorry, is that investment going to match the revenue? And that to me brings me some pause. Like I don't know when we're talking about whatever $500 billion going into data centers today, is that actually going to like materialize in terms of revenue in the next like 10 years? That makes me a little nervous that there might be like an overinvestment in certain parts of this AI economy.
yeah, I think I saw a stat that it was like OpenAI and Anthropic have actually added more net new ARR or something like that. I don't know how you define ARR, but like revenue, whatever, than like every publicly traded SaaS company. I might be getting the stat wrong, but it was a pretty insane statistic like that. Just those two companies are literally, they've grown the same amount of like total new dollars of revenue as like the rest of the publicly traded software industry.
The revenue is insane, but like on the other hand, like yeah, like it's crazy how much money they make, and like hats off, like they're doing a fantastic job. Are they going to make 100 billion a year in like 5 years?
Yeah, they maybe might like that. That's the thing is like,
I don't know. To me, it feels like incredible. I don't know. Like I could be wrong. Like I probably wouldn't have expected them to make it, billions of a year either. And so I don't know. Maybe I've been like, maybe I'm continuously on the wrong side of history. I just feel like, okay, great. They're making whatever $10 billion a year right now. Are they going to get to 100? Are they going to get to 500? Like that to me makes me a little bit nervous. Like at some point, I feel like the law of gravity is going to take over, and like,
well, and I know this is a little bit of sort of like the VC content marketing machine Kool-Aid or whatever that I'm sure we've all been drinking. But I mean, part of the sort of the rationality on this is like AI just kind of, it automates things. Like it does these like low level tasks for you. It's like replacing labor. And like if you just think of like most companies, what do they spend money on? I don't know what the average is, but like it's like a good chunk of revenue. Like depending on your business, you might be spending 10 to 50% of your revenue on just labor costs, and whether that's in like manufacturing, whether that's in like software, whatever. So if you're just like switching labor salaries into software revenue, I think it's kind of hard to predict what the ramp will actually look like, really. And it's like pretty big. Like it's like tens of trillions of dollars that could eventually move over. But then it's a question of like, does that happen in 1 year, 10 years, 100 years? It'll probably happen within 100 years, right? But like,
a few thoughts on that. First of all, if you look at like historical, technology shifts, I actually don't think a lot of money has been made in like saving stuff. It's usually comes from like coming up with a bunch of new applications. Like, I mean, I don't know if you looked at like, trains or something like that, rails, right? Like we probably saved a little bit of money, like getting rid of horses, but I feel like it actually turns out like we open up like 10x more newer market. And the reason why I actually feel like sometimes, and it's not necessarily saying it's like, order of magnitude is wrong. Like I actually think on the saving side, like, oh yeah, we're going to save so much money automating stuff. I don't know if the value capture is going to be there.
I think it's just like making people more productive. Like it should get more done.
I think that there's always more money in like creating new markets, and it's not even like making people more productive. I think it's going to be like there's going to be a bunch of new jobs no one's even thought about, and that's going to be where like the money gets made.
You've probably seen the memes of like people, tweets of like these are the 5 jobs that are going to exist in the future, and it's like, AI researcher, vibe coder, insert a couple more funny things. Like it's kind of true. There'll probably be a lot of vibe coders in 10 years.
I mean, like I think internet is a good example, right? Like internet, I don't know if like internet displaced that many jobs, but it created a fuck ton of new jobs. And that's like where most of the value of internet was created, is like not like saving money for librarians or whatever. Like, yeah, I mean, sure. Like it just turns out like everyone can now find information faster, and like that makes everyone more productive. And now there's all these new jobs like making websites and building, startups and all this other stuff. And that, I don't know.
And to your point about like the downsides of raising too much money, just for someone who hasn't thought through this before, typically if you're thinking about like getting an exit on some sort of investment, whether you're a founder or an investor, when someone puts capital into a business, like let's just say I invest $100 million in Modal right now today, let's say you'd raised no other money before, typically the terms you kind of agree to is that the investor that puts their money in gets their return first. That 100 million you put in, there's like a 1x liquidation preference. So if I put in 100 million, I get paid first. So let's just say whatever, you raised a bunch of money, multiples are really high. Your company's worth 100 times revenue. You raise $1 billion at a 10 billion post-money valuation, things look great. Fast forward 2 years, multiples come down. You're no longer worth 100 times revenue. Let's say your multiple falls and you're now worth 10 times revenue. It's like your valuation right there is down 90%. Well, let's say you raised $1 billion at 10 billion post. You're now worth $1 billion on paper. You're down 90% and you raised $1 billion. So as the founders and the employees of the business, you get no capital back. And let's say also maybe the company's only worth 500 million or 100 million or zero. Like the investors also don't necessarily get paid back. Like, so it's like an interesting dilemma of like, yeah, you do want the capital. Like it's good to have money, but like if you like that, the more that you raise, it sets that like sort of like minimum bar of failure, which, it's just good to consider. Like, don't just assume. Like,
I 100% agree. I'm going to throw in another point about that people often forget about. Taxes. When you raise at a very high valuation, you also screw up your 409A, and like you make it, a lot more expensive for your employees to exercise, your options. And there's all these tricks you can do if you avoid racing, especially when you're near the QSBS threshold. Maybe you do some safe rounds in order to get around that and keep the 490 low. And there's all these like things you can also do. So I think there's many benefits to like trying to keep that, the common valuation down. But 100% agree with what you said, right? Like the more you raise, the more of a bar you create to exceed for the next round, and it gets harder and harder. Anyway, I think that's like the only time. Like I actually think VCs and founders are like have quite good alignment for most parts, but the one clear misalignment I think I see a little bit in like VC versus founders is like VCs will always advise you to take more money than you need. And they're going to make up all these reasons. They're like, well, it's always good to have money. It's good to raise from a position of strength. You never want to raise when you need the money. Who knows what happens in the market, which I always think is like the most silly reason. Because like, if you expect the market to go down, why are you then putting in money? Like,
yeah.
I don't know. I think VCs will sometimes make up all these reasons to like, want to like, foie gras their founders, and that's like, I don't know. I would be a little bit skeptical about some of those reasons.
Yeah. And ultimately, VCs make most of their money on average just from raising their next fund because you get those management fees that are kind of locked in. It's like a SaaS contract. Like you raise $100 million, you get 2% a year for 10 years. So you raise $100 million, you just locked in 20 million of management fee revenue for the next 10 years. It's like just a massive enterprise contract, really. And so how do you raise your next fund? Well, I'm an investor in Modal. I tell you, raise a big round at a super high price so that on paper I look good and I go raise my next fund. And then it's almost like, who gives a shit what happens to Modal because that's in the rearview mirror. Like I'm doing new deals. I'm deploying more capital because I got to get the next fund raised. So the system does work. Like it's worked really well at creating a lot of value, but it's definitely something to just be like cognizant about if you're a founder. It's like the incentives are not always fully aligned.
Yeah, and especially when you think about like the how long the economic cycles, the macro cycles last. You kind of have to think about like the return profile over an entire economic cycle. And I think that the truth is like most startup investors have not lived through a whole cycle. So they don't necessarily think about that. They think more about like, what's the markup I can get on the next round? Because that's gonna determine my promotion, right?
Yeah.
So I think most startup investors are more interested in like, I put in money in this valuation, and then the next round better be a higher valuation, right? Like they don't care about like going public because that's like 10 years later. They're like, yeah, whatever. Like,
we'll all be dead by then. Hopefully not. But yeah. Like for me, my first fund, I started investing in Q1 of 2021. You get slapped in the face pretty fast. Within like 2 years, it was like, holy shit, the valuation does matter. Like it can be good businesses can be overvalued. Like those are two separate things. Like, and also shitty businesses can be undervalued too. I mean, that's called value investing. That's,
I don't think there's any value investing in startups, by the way.
yeah, there's not, but yeah, it was a good lesson I got like slapped with pretty quickly. It was just like, hey, the price does matter.
You mean in the sort of the mini downturn in like summer of 2022, or?
Well, yeah, like you get in and you're like, holy shit, you cannot be investing at 100 times ARR if the company is not actually growing like 10x in a year, right? So like, let's say you value the company at 100x ARR. The company grows 10x over the next year. To hit the same price, you need the company to be valued at 10x ARR. Hopefully, your next round is like 20 or 30x ARR if we're 100x before. But like multiple compression is a thing that is hard to control. Like a lot of it is just market. And like some of the issues too is like, let's say I'm another founder, like I compete with Modal and I say, oh, Modal raised it, whatever ARR price you raised at. That's all I know. Like, I don't know, was there debt in there? What are your margins like? I might not even know what your growth rate is, honestly. And I just say, oh, Modal is this. I should also be valued at this. You get this game of like everyone's kind of comparing themselves. And at the end of the day, only one of those is a good asset. And there's probably a lot of like subpar, lower quality assets. And maybe they're not given quite the same premium on the multiple. Like they're slightly worse, but it's like, if one of them was worth 100x, one of them was worth 90, one of them was worth 80x ARR, like the 90 and the 80 should probably be at like 9 and 8.
I would say though that like multiples today are kind of healthy. I actually feel like multiples like a few years ago were kind of more out of whack.
Yeah, they're pretty fair. Like if you look at OpenAI, you can argue that there was that one like viral clip about Bessemer like explaining like ignoring the negative gross margins, these are actually pretty reasonably valued businesses on a growth rate.
So that again like brings me some comfort. Like I don't think if there's an AI bubble, I think it's gonna kind of fizzle out. Like it's not gonna be as spectacular as like .com when you were raising money based on eyeballs, whatever. Right? Like there's like real substantive value being created here.
Yeah, to your point, like people are using them. Like it's not like, I don't know if you remember Web3 and crypto, like those. It was like the interesting thing was like the spreadsheets looked good. Like there was revenue, but they were like not. It wasn't real revenue. Like it was like literally day trading, gambling, versus with some of the AI stuff. It's like, oh, it like made a website that someone uses to make commercial transactions on. Like there's like underlying commercial purposes to it.
But although the Web3 like hasn't, I don't know in hindsight, was that a bubble that popped? I don't know. Look at Coinbase's valuation; it's still pretty good. Like I don't know. Like I personally don't like crypto. I feel like there's like an enormous amount of resources that were draining on society into like what's basically just like gambling. like for that reason, I kind of despise crypto. But like if you look at like the valuations, like they're still pretty high in crypto land.
And that it's all a function of just like people have too much capital. They're looking for returns. They're deploying it into things that they think will keep going up. Really, at the end of the day, that's all it is.
Totally, exactly, and that's actually why I think in the way, like I actually suspect a little bit more inflation and like slightly higher interest rates is maybe good because it actually like creates a higher hurdle rate, which means like now people have to go out and look for like more productive stuff to invest in, which in theory should like drain crypto because it has like a 0% interest rate. I don't know, man. Like it hasn't really panned out, but in theory, I think there's an argument for it.
So I got a question for you. Akshat said I got to ask you about how you keep the temperature and CO2 levels in the office.
Oh boy,
Yeah, what's the story there? So you guys are pretty.
I suspect that I'm not like a health nut. I'm certainly not an RFK. I think there's like certain things that actually do matter though. And one of the things I've been like radicalized on is like CO2 levels. Because there's actually very clear like relationships, like CO2 levels versus like productivity and cognitive performance. It's a very clear relationship. And a lot of indoor air, a lot of office schools also. Like I actually think like one of the most like cost effective thing we can do in this country, in this world, is just like better indoor airs in schools. We should just when I'm like a billionaire, I want to like just fund this like stupid thing, which is like send CO2 monitors to all the schools in the world, and just like if it's like too high, crack a window. That's it. And so yeah, I mean, I bought a bunch of CO2 monitors for our office. I go and look at them. If it's bad, I open a window. Honestly, I think it matters.
And it's that simple. You literally just open a window and it clears out the CO2. And
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's like the only way effectively to like. Sometimes if you have like a good ventilation in an office, like it kind of just automatically just trigger. But I don't know. I mean, we're in Soho. This building is like 100 years old. Like I think the only way to really get like fresh air in is to open a window.
interesting. Okay. What does the data show about CO2 levels? Like it just make your brain think slower?
Yeah. There's all these like studies. You look at like problem solving ability, like it goes down like very quickly. But like normal indoor air is like, I think 500 ppm parts per million. It's like that's kind of like good. That's like outdoor air roughly, or sometimes maybe 300-400. But often like in offices, it hits like 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000. By the way, is like brain damage. In airplanes, it often hits like 2,500, 300. I used to wonder why do I always get so drowsy during takeoff? It's because like CO2 levels go up inside the airplanes, and I always used to pass out.
I do feel less productive on planes. Like I feel like my motivation level, because I usually try to work on flights, but there's definitely some cases where I'm like, fuck it, I'm just gonna like sleep or like listen to music or something.
It's primarily during takeoff, like that like CO2 levels peak. It gets a little bit better once you're in the air and it starts to circulate, but
Yeah, I could actually see that because usually it's like it takes me a little longer to like switch into like pull my laptop out type of mode after takeoff. Huh. One last thing I wanted to ask you about. So you've worked in Europe and you've worked in New York in kind of like seeing the differences between maybe just Sweden, maybe just Swedish tech, but Europe versus the US. What's the difference in like the tech ecosystems in your opinion?
I mean, first of all, I think Europe has incredible tech talent, and so I'm actually not like a perma bear in Europe. Like I do think there's a lot of structural challenges with Europe, and but I look at like actually Sweden. I think it's also like doing okay versus just Europe. But so I think there's tremendous talent out there. I think it's just not being taken advantage of, or like like Europe is really not. And then, so I don't know. US has way more availability of capital. It also has like much better options taxation. I think that makes a huge difference. I think when you look at these like startup cultures, a lot of it just comes down to like having smart people, which I think Europe has. And then the other thing is just like having a history of success and just like having like a culture of like, oh yeah, like my buddy worked at that other startup and he made so much money. Oh my God, maybe I should also work at a startup. Like, and that latter part, I don't think has existed quite yet. And then maybe a third thing I feel like hasn't quite existed in Europe for a long time. It's this, I don't know what to call it, but like reality distortion field type founders. Daniel Ek was actually really good at the founder of Spotify. But like I feel like at least in Stockholm, there's been kind of a lack of like big vision, crazy megalomaniac founders until quite recently. Now there's like a few of them. And I think that makes also another huge difference. It's just like having these like big visions. Like, I'm so tired of like European startups like building like tiny, like they're building a SaaS for grocery stores or like whatever. I'm like, build something crazy, something big. And I feel like that's starting to happen a little bit more, at least in Sweden. So I'm bullish, but I don't know.
Do you get that a lot more than in the US? Just like bigger vision opportunity?
Yeah, it's too big. You go to SF, like everyone's like trying to build the next OpenAI or like the next whatever. Like I'm like, chill out. You're like 21 and like
We're going to cure cancer.
yeah, exactly. But I mean, it's like good. Like I think we need more people on average to have these like big bold visions. Like I think it's good. I think it's good.
It feels like the sweet spot is like solve a specific unique problem today with like the vision of like, we're going to cure cancer, but we're starting with this. And it's like you bridge the in 20 years, 30 years, this is how we get there.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, this is a lot of fun. Thanks for coming on the show.
This is great. This is awesome. It was amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for listening. Thanks again to Meow in Hanover Park for supporting this episode. Head to meow.com and tell them Turner sent you to see if your startup is eligible for free bookkeeping, and hanoverpark.com/Turner to upgrade your fund admin to the 21st century. If you missed it, make sure to check out last week's episode with Austin Petersmith on building Howie, the world's AI secretary. And tune in next week for Adit Abraham at Reducto on how they're defining the way the world processes unstructured data. If you like this conversation, please like, comment, subscribe, and name your next sandbox environment on Modal after me. If you don't want to miss a future episode, subscribe to my newsletter, The Split, linked in the description, to get each episode plus a transcript emailed directly to your inbox every week. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.